He bought 2 alien girls from a drunk for one drink. Now these 2 beauties are always by his side. It was a regular Friday evening when he walked into the local bar after a long week of work. The dull hum of conversation and clinking of glasses filled the air. He needed a break, just a moment to relax and shake off the stress of the office. As he sat down at the counter and ordered a drink, he noticed a strange figure sitting at the far end of the bar. A man, unkempt and disheveled, slurring his words. The man caught his attention not because of his rough appearance, but because of the odd stories he was telling to anyone who would listen. He talked about otherworldly adventures, about distant planets and strange creatures from the far corners of space. The man wasn't just talking about fantasy. His words were full of conviction, and there was something about the way he spoke that made it seem almost real. Laughing it off as just another drunk rambling nonsense, the protagonist took a sip from his drink, but something about the conversation kept pulling him in. He wasn't interested in alien stories, but there was something about the man's wild energy that made it impossible to look away. As the night wore on, the man grew more animated. He waved his arms around, sloshing his drink with each exaggerated gesture. Then, as though he was sharing the biggest secret of all, he leaned in and muttered, "I bought 2 alien girls. I won them in a trade, but I don't need them anymore."
I'll let them go for just one drink.
The protagonist blinked. Was this guy serious? Alien girls? It was the kind of comment you would expect from a person clearly lost in his own mind. The protagonist didn't know what to make of it. He chuckled nervously, shaking his head. "You're telling me you bought aliens?" he asked, not really expecting an answer. The man nodded, a smile spreading across his face. "For just one drink."
I'll sell them to you. You'll see.
"They're beautiful, but you have to act fast." The protagonist raised an eyebrow, thinking it was a joke, but the man didn't seem to be laughing. In fact, he looked desperate, almost as if he was trying to unload a heavy burden. At that moment, the protagonist found himself wondering, what kind of person buys aliens, and why would he let them go so easily? Before he could stop himself, he blurted out, "Okay. Sure, one drink. Let's see these alien girls you're talking about." The drunk man gave a toothless grin, and with a wink he grabbed the protagonist by the arm, guiding him outside to the alley behind the bar. There, standing in the shadows, were 2 figures. The light from the street lamp above illuminated their features just enough for him to see. They weren't exactly what he expected. At first glance, they looked human. Their hair was long and flowing. Their skin had an almost ethereal glow to it, and their eyes were unlike anything he had ever seen. Large, bright, and filled with an emotion that he couldn't quite place. They looked confused, but there was something otherworldly about them. The protagonist took a step back, unsure of what to think. "What is this?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The man smiled again, a knowing glint in his eyes. "These are the girls. Take them or leave them." He didn't know why, but in that moment, something deep inside him told him to make the choice. Maybe it was the intrigue of the situation. Maybe it was just the sheer absurdity of it all. But before he knew it, he handed the man a bill, and the deal was made. He walked away with the 2 girls, not really sure what to think. His mind was racing, trying to understand what had just happened. As they walked back to his apartment, the girls were silent, walking beside him like they had nowhere else to go. He kept glancing at them, unsure of what to say, but they didn't seem scared or upset. They seemed lost, like they had been plucked out of somewhere unfamiliar and dropped into his world. When they reached his apartment, he led them inside, still processing the strange turn of events.
You can stay here for now, he said, his voice awkward.
"I don't know what this is, but I'll figure something out." They nodded silently, taking in their new surroundings. He didn't know what he was getting himself into, but for the first time in his life, He felt like he was part of something bigger than himself. The next morning, he awoke to the sound of soft footsteps. He rubbed his eyes, still groggy from the night before. The two alien girls were sitting on the couch, staring at the walls of his small apartment with wide eyes. They looked almost childlike in their curiosity. His heart raced as he remembered the events of the night before. Had it all been a dream? As he stood up and stretched, he saw that they hadn't moved. The girl on the left, with dark brown hair and the softest smile, looked at him as he approached. Her eyes, bright and unblinking, studied him like he was the most interesting thing she had ever seen. "Are you okay?" he asked, unsure of what else to say. He wasn't even sure they spoke his language, but the girl nodded. "We are fine," she said, her voice soft and gentle. "Thank you for bringing us here." He blinked in surprise. "You can speak?" "Yes," she replied with a small smile. "We learned your language quickly." The other girl, who had platinum blonde hair and striking green eyes, didn't say much, but she smiled at him, too. It was a small gesture, but it made him feel like he wasn't alone in this strange situation. They explained that they weren't sure how they had ended up on Earth. They weren't from this planet, not by a long shot. Their home was far away, beyond the stars, a place full of wonders and dangers he couldn't even begin to understand. The world they came from was called Thessera, and it had once been a peaceful land before everything changed. They told him their names, but even their names didn't feel like they belonged to his world. They were ancient names, names that seemed to echo from distant realms, but he could tell they were genuine, and there was no malice in their voices. They were just two young women trying to find their way in a world that wasn't theirs. The more they spoke, the more he began to realize how much danger they had been in. They were refugees in a strange land, with nowhere to go and no one to turn to. They had been part of a diplomatic mission that had gone wrong, and now they were stranded. The man who had sold them to him had been their only connection to Earth, and even he didn't understand their true purpose. "I don't know how I ended up in this mess," he said, pacing the room, his mind spinning. "But I'll figure it out." "I promise I won't let anything happen to you." They smiled at him, and for a moment, everything felt right. The world outside didn't matter. He had two beautiful, strange beings in his home, and for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel alone. He didn't know what the future held. But as he looked at them, something inside him told him they would face it together. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them as a team. The girl's presence made him feel something he hadn't felt in years: purpose. The days that followed were unlike anything he had ever known. What had started as an absurd encounter with a drunken stranger had now become his new reality. The alien girls, though kind and polite, were completely out of place in his apartment. It wasn't just their otherworldly beauty that made things strange. It was the way they saw the world. Everything was new to them. At first, he thought it would be easy to look after them. After all, they seemed so gentle and graceful, and they weren't causing any trouble. But as the days passed, it became clear that they needed more than just food and shelter. They needed guidance he couldn't offer. One afternoon, after a long day at work, he returned to his apartment to find the girls trying to cook. The kitchen was a mess. Flour was scattered across the counter, and strange objects from the refrigerator were piled together in an odd, mismatched combination. The protagonist sighed, realizing that they didn't know how to use the appliances. They had tried their best, but it was clear they were struggling. He took a deep breath, forcing a smile. "Let me show you how to do it," he said, taking over the task. As he showed them how to chop vegetables and set the oven, he couldn't help but wonder how much they must have missed their home. This was their new life, and it was completely different from everything they had known. But the struggles weren't just in the kitchen. As time went on, he began to feel the weight of responsibility. His friends and family started noticing the girls. At first, they were curious and fascinated, but soon their questions turned into concern. Are they really from another planet? His friend asked one day. Are you sure you're not in over your head with this? The questions were hard to answer. How could he explain that he didn't fully understand what was going on himself? He couldn't tell them the whole truth. No one would believe him anyway. The girls tried their best to fit in, but they didn't always understand the rules of Earth. They would get strange looks when they wore their long, flowing clothes, or spoke in their soft, melodic voices. They were so different, and people couldn't help but notice. It made him realize how isolated they really were. Despite the challenges, he didn't give up on them. He knew they needed him, even if they didn't always show it. The bond between them began to grow stronger as the girls adapted to their new surroundings. He began to see the human side of them. They weren't just aliens. They were kind, curious, and, like him, they were trying to make sense of this strange world they had been dropped into. But even with their growing bond, things weren't easy. The world outside seemed to grow more dangerous for them by the day. One afternoon, while they were walking through the park, a group of people gathered around them. They stared, some with fascination, others with fear. Whispers spread through the crowd, and it didn't take long before someone approached them. "Are you aliens?" the man asked, his voice trembling with excitement and fear. The protagonist stepped forward, trying to shield the girls from the attention. "They're just guests from out of town," he said quickly, hoping to defuse the situation. But it was no use. The man's curiosity had turned into something darker. He pulled out his phone and began recording them, asking more and more invasive questions. The girls didn't know how to react. They had never faced this kind of attention before. The protagonist's heart raced. "Enough!" he said firmly, stepping between the man and the girls. "Leave them alone." But it wasn't just this one encounter. It was the constant attention, the constant stares, and the growing suspicion of others. He couldn't protect them forever, and that thought terrified him. One evening, as the sun set behind the city skyline, the girls finally opened up to him. The past few days had been filled with silence between them, and he knew something was weighing on their minds. He had always been there for them, but now it was their turn to share their story. Sitting in the dimly lit living room, the girls finally spoke. "We have to tell you the truth," the one with blonde hair said, her voice low and serious. "We didn't come here by accident. We were sent here for a purpose." The protagonist felt a chill run down his spine. The air in the room seemed to change, and he sat up straighter, trying to focus on their words. "We were part of a diplomatic mission," the other girl explained. "Our planet, Thessera, is at war. There is a threat to our people, and we were sent to gather information. We never expected to end up here, on Earth. But something went wrong and we got separated from our group." The revelation hit him like a punch to the gut. They weren't just lost aliens. They were part of something much bigger, something that involved their entire planet. They had been sent here with a mission, and now they were stranded, alone. "Why didn't you tell me earlier?" he asked, his voice a mix of confusion and hurt. "Why keep this from me?" The girl with blonde hair looked down at the floor, her hands nervously clasped together. "We didn't know if we could trust you. We didn't know if you would help us, or if we would become just another problem for you to deal with." The protagonist took a deep breath, trying to process everything. It felt like his world was being flipped upside down. One moment, he was just helping two girls who had nowhere else to go. The next, he was tangled up in an interplanetary conflict that he couldn't even begin to understand. But despite the confusion and the fear, he couldn't walk away. They had trusted him with their secret, and he owed it to them to help. "You don't have to worry about that," he said firmly. "I'm not going to leave you." "I'll help you, no matter what." The girls looked at him, their faces filled with both gratitude and relief. It was clear that they had been carrying this burden alone for so long. Now they had someone to lean on. And as much as he didn't fully understand everything that was happening, he knew one thing for sure. He couldn't let them face it alone. But the more they talked, the more he realized just how dangerous the situation was. There were forces from their home planet that were actively searching for them, and those forces wouldn't stop until they found the girls. The protagonist's life had just become much more complicated, and the stakes were higher than he ever imagined. As they sat in the dim light of the room, the weight of their words settled around him. He didn't know what would happen next, but he did know one thing. He wasn't going to let anything happen to them. They were his responsibility now, and he would do whatever it took to keep them safe. And as the night wore on, he made a silent vow to himself. He would stand by them no matter the danger, no matter the cost. He had made a promise to help them, and he intended to keep it. Together they would face whatever challenges came their way, and they would do it as a team. The days that followed were filled with tension and uncertainty. The weight of the truth the girls had shared with him hung heavy in the air, leaving the protagonist with more questions than answers. Their mission, their connection to a war on their home planet, and the forces that were now hunting them. All of it seemed far too big for one person to handle, but here he was, standing at the center of it all. He had promised them he would help, and he intended to keep that promise, but now the stakes were higher than he ever imagined. It wasn't just about protecting two alien girls anymore. It was about choosing a side in a conflict that spanned across galaxies, with a future that was uncertain at best. He wasn't just caught in the middle. He had to make a choice. The girls had explained that they were part of a peaceful mission gone wrong. They had come to Earth to gather information and ensure that their planet's fragile peace would survive the looming threat of war. But something had gone terribly wrong, and now they were stranded, alone, with no way of returning home. The people from their planet who had sent them were no longer looking for peace. They were searching for the girls, hoping to bring them back to complete their mission, no matter the cost. The protagonist sat at his kitchen table, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. The apartment felt smaller now, suffocating even, as he looked across at the two girls sitting silently. They had been with him for weeks, and he had grown so accustomed to their presence. They weren't just strangers anymore. They were his friends, even family in a way. The bond between them had formed quickly, and though he didn't understand everything about their world, he couldn't deny how deeply he cared for them. "I don't know what to do," he said softly, breaking the silence that had filled the room. His voice was filled with uncertainty, a quiet fear that he hadn't allowed himself to feel until now. "I never asked for any of this. I never imagined I would end up in the middle of a war, but here we are." The girl with the long dark hair looked up at him. Her eyes, so full of emotion, seemed to search his soul. "We never wanted to bring this to your world," she said quietly. "But you're the only one who can help us now. We don't know where else to turn. We trust you more than anyone." Her words were simple, but they carried a weight that made his heart heavy. The trust they had in him, how could he let them down now? He had made a promise to protect them, but the truth was, he had no idea how to fight the kind of battle that was now looming. The enemy wasn't just from another country or another part of the world. It was from the stars. The other girl, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. Her voice was softer, but just as determined. "You have a choice to make," she said. "We can go back, but that will mean bringing the war here. You've seen the kind of people that are looking for us. They'll do anything to capture us and finish their mission. If you choose to help us, we might be able to stop it, but it won't be easy." The protagonist sat back in his chair, trying to process everything. He had never imagined that his life would take this turn. Just a few weeks ago, he had been living a simple, ordinary life. He worked a regular job, spent time with his friends, and came home to an empty apartment each night. But now, he was caught in the middle of an intergalactic conflict that he couldn't begin to understand. "Why did you come to Earth in the first place?" he asked, the question escaping his lips before he could stop it. "Why not stay on your own planet and deal with your own problems?" The girls exchanged a brief glance, and then the one with blonde hair spoke. We came to Earth because we thought it was safe. The war on our planet had reached a point where we needed to find allies, to gather support. But when we arrived, everything went wrong. Our people betrayed us, and we were left here, stranded. No one else can help us now. It was then that the full weight of their situation hit him. They hadn't just been stranded by bad luck. They had been abandoned. The people they had trusted had turned against them, leaving them to face their enemies alone. And now they were asking him for help. "You're asking me to help you fight a war," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know how to fight wars. I'm just a regular guy." The girl with the dark hair nodded, her expression one of quiet understanding.
We know, but sometimes ordinary people are called to do extraordinary things.
"You may not have asked for this, but you're here now. And we need you." The silence in the room deepened, and he could feel the weight of the decision before him. He could turn his back on them, tell them to go back to their planet and figure it out on their own. But could he live with that? Could he live with knowing he had abandoned them when they needed him most? He closed his eyes, letting the decision settle in his mind. The truth was, he had already made his choice the moment he brought them into his home. He had promised to protect them, and he wasn't about to break that promise now. He opened his eyes and looked at them both.
"All right," he said, his voice steady now. "I'll help you."
"I don't know how, but I'll figure it out. You're not alone in this anymore." The girls smiled, and for the first time in a long while, the tension in the room seemed to lift. It wasn't going to be easy, and there were still so many questions to answer. But they had a chance now. Together, they had a chance. The next few days were a blur of planning and preparation. They spent hours talking, sharing everything they knew about their world, their people, and their enemies. The more he learned, the more he understood the gravity of the situation. The girls were right. They couldn't go back, not without risking everything. As the days turned into weeks, the protagonist found himself becoming more and more involved in their world. He wasn't just an observer anymore. He was part of their struggle, and as much as he had tried to deny it, he had become a crucial piece of the puzzle. The war wasn't just something that was happening in another galaxy. It had come to his doorstep. He didn't know what the future held. There were still dangers ahead, and there was no guarantee they would win. But as he looked at the two girls by his side, he knew one thing for sure. They had made the right choice, and whatever happened, they would face it together. For the first time in his life, he felt like he was part of something bigger than himself, something that mattered. Together, they would face the challenges ahead, and no matter what happened, they would face them as a family.